Hi folks, welcome to this Sunday's Sunday Catechism. We're on to question 27, Christ's Humiliation, and there's a huge amount in it, so let's get straight to it. Let's read it first. Question 27, what was Christ's humiliation? Christ's humiliation was his birth as a man into poverty, being made subject to the law, suffering the miseries of this life, the wrath of God, and the cursed death of the cross, being buried and continuing under the power of death for a time. What was Christ's humiliation? Christ's humiliation was his birth as a man into poverty, being made subject to the law, suffering the miseries of this life, the wrath of God, and the cursed death of the cross, being buried and continuing under the power of death for a time. Now, that's a summary of the work of Christ, and it was a humiliation, because you need to remember where he came from. We are right now remembering, going through in our Luke with Luke. We're on Luke chapter 2 and looking at the birth of Christ. And it is such an amazing thing. But this question goes through everything, his life and his death. So the scripture proofs used are Luke 2 verse 7, Galatians 4 verse 4, Hebrews 12, 2-3. I'm not going to read them all, but you can look these up if you wish. He was born, Isaiah 53, he's despised and rejected of men. Luke 22:44 and Matthew 27:46, the crucifixion. Philippians 2:8, he made himself nothing, taking the very form of a servant. 1 Corinthians 15, 3-4 is his death and his burial. And then perhaps the one I will read is Acts 2 and verse 24, where Peter's explaining to his fellow Israelites, this man was handed over to you by God's chosen, deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. But God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him. And verse 31, he spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah. So Christ's humiliation is just his whole life. It was humbling for him. You know, I'm trying to think about what you might think of humiliation. Let's suppose that you were a great company executive, used to running a large company and sitting in a boardroom in a fancy office, and you find yourself working as a shop assistant. You would consider that humiliating in terms of your job. Maybe you're just a world-class singer and you're used to singing in massive stadiums, and you end up being part of a small choir in a tiny community. You might consider that humiliating. In other words, it's all the question of what Christ came from, his glory, and what he came to. And although we often romanticize it, it was horrendous for him. He was in a low condition. I mean, what does it say? He was born into poverty. That is astonishing. He was subject to the law. He suffered the miseries of this life. Of course Christ got sick. Of course Christ experienced pain. Of course Christ experienced rejection and sorrow. The wrath of God. Some people don't like the idea of the wrath of God, but the wrath of God was poured out on him. It was a cup, take this cup from me. What's this cup? This is the cup of God's wrath. The cursed death of the cross. Being buried. The humiliation of that. Every body. It's a humbling thing to be taken away, naked, buried. And he continued under the power of death for a time. That's what it says. What was Christ's humiliation? He did it for us. Sorry, that's just what's amazing me. He did it for us. He did it for you. He did it for me. And sometimes when we're overwhelmed by our own sin, and sometimes when we don't have any hope, and sometimes when we're really struggling, we need to remember this. Is there anything that Christ coming, being born, living in poverty, subject to the law, suffering the miseries of this life, the wrath of God, the cursed death of the cross, being buried, continuing in death for some time. Is there anything which God could have done more for you? And is there anything that you do or that your sin has which defeats that? I don't think so. Christ's humiliation leads to our exaltation. Next week we'll come on to his exaltation, which also leads to our exaltation. But God bless you this week. Take some time to think about that and meditate on it. As I reflect on it, I still stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene. God bless you. Bye.